Protecting the reliability and affordability of our electricity is of utmost concern for our government, because this is about protecting the lives and livelihoods of Albertans. And what did the feds tell us, Alberta, when we tried voicing our very real and serious concerns about these regulations? They told us, too bad, we're going to do it anyway. In fact, they refused to work with Alberta or listen to Canadians while developing their net zero electricity regulations. Do they really expect us to just freeze in the dark? Sadly, such uncaring arrogance is typical of this Liberal government. And that is why last November we introduced the first Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act resolution so that our province could take strong and effective action against these destructive regulations. And today we are taking another step to protect Albertans' livelihoods by challenging the constitutionality of the net zero electricity regulations in the Court of Appeal of Alberta, and we look forward to making our case. Alberta will no longer tolerate having our livelihoods threatened, our industries targeted, and our resources landlocked by Ottawa. We will not accept their reckless and dangerous policies that will harm our economy, stifle our energy industry, jeopardize the reliability of our electricity grid, and raise electricity prices for Albertans. Prime Minister Mark Carney must immediately commence working with our government to reset the relationship between Ottawa and Alberta with meaningful action rather than hollow rhetoric. We will not sit by quietly. Albertans expect to be treated with fairness and respect, just like any other province in this country. Our government will not blindly accept unconstitutional net zero regulations that put Albertans in harm's way. We will always stand up and fight for our province, and we will not let Albertans freeze in the dark.
Prime Minister Mark Carney promised to work for all Canadians after winning a Liberal minority government last night. With only 3 seats in Alberta, not blue, the Premier says she's going to speak with Albertans on how to proceed and protect the province from what she calls future hostile acts from Ottawa. It comes as the province aims to simplify the process for Albertans to hold a referendum on constitutional issues. CTV's Shaylan Skalski reports.
Just shut up and just be satisfied with whatever the central government decides to do, regardless of whether it's constitutional or not.
The Premier says that's how Albertans are feeling, but that it won't continue, as she pledges to get respect from the new Liberal Prime Minister.
Whether or not he, as a leader, is going to be able to change course remains to be seen. He's given some undertakings, but he said different things in different forms to different people in different parts of the country.
Smith says she will spend the coming days discussing Alberta's future, a future she hopes remains within a united Canada, adding Albertans can put any issue on the table for a possible referendum.
If citizens want to put a question on a ballot and get enough of their fellow citizens to sign that petition, then those questions will be put forward.
I invite the Premier of Alberta to say the words, "I support Canada."
Hear, hear. Yeah.
Not once yesterday when asked, did the Premier stand up for Canada? This should be simple. She spent most of the time yesterday defending American election laws. The UCP government has introduced new laws that will make it easier to hold a separatist referendum, and that process alone will badly damage investment in our province and relationships with First Nation communities. Does the Premier recognize that in her never-ending pursuit for far-right, American-inspired extremist ideology, she is taking down her own province?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support Canada. I would like the Prime Minister to stand up and say that he supports Alberta and is on Team Alberta. And I'd like, actually, the members opposite to do the same. Why, in every opportunity they have to offer defence, they never stand up for Canada? They are constantly standing up for what was the Liberal NDP coalition and the damaging policies that have crushed our economy, chased away investment. Mr. Speaker, I am proudly, and my caucus are proudly Canadian, but we also want to make sure that the Constitution is honoured and the federal government respects our Constitution.
3 provinces, a combined $700 billion economy. If Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Quebec separated from Canada, the financial and political earthquake would reshape North America forever. These regions fuel Canada's economy. Alberta's oil wealth alone accounts for 15 to 20% of GDP, while Quebec's exit would isolate the Atlantic provinces entirely. For Canadians, this isn't just about maps. Imagine energy bills doubling overnight or facing border checkpoints to visit family. Picture retirement savings evaporating as markets spiral. The ripple effects would touch every aspect of life, from Indigenous sovereignty to global influence. Our breakdown uncovers the money, power, and people caught in the fallout. When nations fracture, it's not just politics at play, it's the economy, identity, and daily life that take the hit. At Canada Connect, we unpack the global and national fault lines shaping our country's future. Whether it's political power struggles, resource disputes, or movements threatening the foundations of our confederation, we bring clarity to complex issues that affect real Canadians. Thanks for being here. Your support means everything. It allows us to keep covering the stories that matter, especially the ones too important to ignore. Now, let's break down the economic, political, and social chaos Canada could face if Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Quebec went their own way. The economic domino effect. Alberta sends $25 billion more to Ottawa than it gets back every year. If separation happens, that money disappears overnight, leaving a gaping hole in the federal budget, enough to fund healthcare for 5 million Canadians. The remaining provinces face a grim choice: slash services or hike taxes. Either way, households already struggling with rising energy bills feel the squeeze. The loss of Alberta's oil hits hard. Canada's GDP shrinks by 15 to 20% instantly. Gas prices spike nationwide as Ontario and Quebec refineries lose access to Alberta's crude. Higher trucking costs push up grocery prices, stretching family budgets even thinner. Inflation surges. Alberta keeps its $25 billion, but independence comes with steep costs. Setting up federal agencies, printing currency, and securing borders drains resources quickly. As oil shocks ripple across the nation, so too do disruptions in agriculture. Saskatchewan, which grows half of Canada's wheat and most of its lentils, exits. Global grain markets panic, driving up food prices worldwide. Inside Canada, bread and pasta become more expensive, while Saskatchewan profits by selling crops abroad. Farmers benefit, but consumers pay the price. The tech sector fractures with Quebec's separation. Montreal's AI hubs and aerospace firms suddenly operate in a foreign country. Companies shift to Toronto, draining Quebec's tax base. Skilled workers follow jobs south to the US or west to what's left of Canada, worsening the brain drain. Federal programs collapse under the strain. Indigenous communities near new borders face patchwork services. Military bases in Alberta and Quebec close, shrinking the armed forces. Equalization payments stop, devastating poorer provinces like Manitoba and the Maritimes. Schools close, hospitals cut staff, and communities struggle to stay afloat. The economic system, like a machine with interlocking parts, grinds to a halt. Trade chaos erupts. Alberta's oil needs pipelines through Canada or the US, while Quebec's hydro exports face new border checks. Delays and tariffs choke supply chains. Corporate HQs flee instability, eroding tax bases just as costs skyrocket. Separation drains money from everyday lives. Pensions shrink, mortgages become harder to afford, and the average worker bears the brunt. and that's just the beginning. Legal battles over borders and treaties loom, threatening to paralyze the nation. Before we continue, we just want to say thank you for watching and supporting what we do here at Canada Connect. This channel exists because of viewers like you, people who care about how political and economic decisions actually affect Canadians on the ground. If you haven't yet, consider subscribing to join this growing community. It helps us keep digging into the stories that matter and ensures you don't miss what comes next. Now, let's dive into the legal and political fracture lines that could reshape Canada as we know it. The Clarity Act requires Ottawa's approval for any province to leave Canada, creating a significant legal hurdle. While Quebec's referendum set some precedent, Alberta's case is murkier. No court has ruled on whether a Western province can legally secede. First Nations chiefs have already accused Alberta Premier Danielle Smith of attempting to manufacture a national unity crisis with her push for easier referendums. The federal government could block Alberta's efforts, sparking years of court battles and driving businesses away from the uncertainty. Indigenous land rights complicate the picture further. Treaties signed with the Crown span provincial lines, raising questions about whether a new Alberta nation would inherit those agreements. The Métis Nation in Saskatchewan and Cree in northern Quebec have already rejected arbitrary borders. Some communities might demand independence, while others could sue to remain part of Canada. One expert calls separation a highly implausible scenario, as negotiating with dozens of Indigenous groups could take decades. The disintegration of Canada's governance would ripple outward like a puzzle losing key pieces. The United States would likely oppose separatist movements, prioritizing stability for trade and defense. Washington depends on Canadian oil, hydropower, and Arctic security. If Alberta leaves, does the Pentagon renegotiate directly with a fractured Canadian military? If Quebec goes, does the United States still recognize Ottawa's claim over shared waters? NAFTA wasn't designed for 3 new countries appearing overnight, and the economic fallout would be severe. Ontario might gain political dominance but lose economic leverage. With Quebec gone, 40% of Canada's economic power vanishes. Trade deals weaken, and industries like auto manufacturing face higher costs, importing aluminum from a now foreign Quebec. Ottawa's influence at the G7 table shrinks as Canada's GDP plummets. Economic chaos would follow. The federal government could impose transit taxes on Alberta's oil, while Quebec's hydro exports face delays from new international agreements. Markets hate instability, banks flee, the Canadian dollar crashes, and pensions take hits. Alberta's dream of energy dominance falters without a sovereign wealth fund to weather oil price swings. For everyone else, higher taxes, broken supply chains, and decades of legal battles. But here's where it gets even more personal. Beyond budgets and borders lies something far more fragile, our shared identity. What happens when the glue holding a country together starts to crack? Stay with us because the next section explores the social unraveling that could follow and why the emotional fallout might be even harder to repair than the economic one. Social unraveling, identity in crisis. Quebec leaving would erase Canada's bilingual identity overnight. French language protections outside Quebec would crumble immediately. Schools in Ontario, New Brunswick, and Manitoba might drop French immersion programs under pressure. Government services in most regions would revert to English only. Francophone communities outside Quebec would become isolated enclaves, disconnected from a broader national vision. Canada's multicultural image would take a direct hit, leaving an English-dominated country struggling to redefine itself. Western alienation would solidify as Alberta and Saskatchewan leave. Polls show 27% of Albertans believe they'd be better off joining the United States, and that sentiment could harden into policy. Alberta might emphasize its pioneer roots over Confederation ties, while Saskatchewan builds its identity around agricultural strength. British Columbia would face a choice anchor Western Canada or align with its former prairie partners. Manitoba, meanwhile, would become an isolated border region. Indigenous communities would reject new borders drawn without their consent. The Métis Nation and Treaty First Nations in Alberta and Saskatchewan would demand control over resource-rich ancestral lands. Quebec's Cree and Inuit could leverage agreements like the James Bay Deal to negotiate separate status. Some might declare sovereignty, creating indigenous territories that challenge both Canadian and separatist maps. Legal battles could drag on for decades, stalling infrastructure projects and locking resources in limbo. Beyond fiscal consequences, the social fabric unravels in unexpected ways. Mixed families would straddle new international boundaries. A bilingual family in Ottawa might suddenly face prohibitive tuition fees for a child studying in Montreal. Identity documents would become contested. Would Quebec-born Canadians living in Vancouver still be citizens? Dual citizenships might emerge, but with restrictions, leaving some stateless during the transition. Even simple things like cell phone plans would become complicated, with roaming charges between what used to be provinces. The world would watch as Canada's multicultural tapestry comes apart, thread by thread. The impacts would be irreversible, leaving a fractured nation struggling to reconcile its past with an uncertain future. Global fallout, a power vacuum. Alberta's oil fields pump 4.3 million barrels a day, 98% of which go straight to the US. This isn't just a trade relationship, it's a lifeline for Washington. Energy giants like Exxon and Chevron already operate in Alberta, and separation would let them bypass Ottawa entirely, securing direct ownership deals. Meanwhile, China moves quickly. CNOOC still owns Nexen, an Alberta oil sands operator. A fractured Canada loses the ability to block foreign takeovers as it did in 2012. Alberta's new government would likely auction off drilling rights to the highest global bidder. Imagine a liquidation auction where sovereignty is traded for short-term cash. Following the energy disruptions, global markets and political alliances quickly react. The US plays hardball on trade. Currently, 75% of Canada's exports go south, but a fractured Canada loses leverage. Washington could slap tariffs on Ontario-made cars unless they meet Made in America rules. Quebec's hydro dams, which power New England, would now supply international electricity subject to taxes and transmission fees. Alberta, landlocked and reliant on pipelines crossing Canadian territory, faces political fights over every barrel of oil. Ottawa could levy fees on shipments, making exports less profitable. NATO sounds the alarm. Canada controls the second largest Arctic territory, but a split nation creates gaps in radar coverage at CFB Cold Lake and Quebec's northern bases. Russia and China exploit the chaos, claiming Arctic shipping lanes as international waters. NORAD's early warning system, reliant on Alberta and Quebec, would now depend on foreign soil. Quebec pivots to Europe but faces roadblocks. The EU doesn't need another energy-dependent member, and France balks at subsidizing Quebec's dairy industry. Geography wins. 70% of Quebec's trade is with the US and Ontario. Saskatchewan's potash deposits, supplying half the world's potash, become a global bargaining chip. China locks in contracts, while the United States retaliates with farm equipment restrictions, sending global grain prices soaring. The breakup narrative promises independence, but the reality is stark. Alberta's oil, Quebec's power, and Saskatchewan's crops become pawns in a game played by superpowers. Separation doesn't create freedom, it creates vulnerability. Louis Krasinski at U of T says Canada's unity is strong right now, and that's the reality. Alberta doesn't have a separatist leader like Quebec once did. If Canada breaks up, the consequences are clear. Economic strain, weakened security, and foreign powers exploiting resources. Separation isn't independence, it's trading Ottawa's rules for someone else's. Canada works because provinces balance each other. Alberta's oil, Ontario's factories, Quebec's power. Alone, they're just small players. As Krasinski notes, unity is Canada's strength. This conversation isn't just about politics, it's about the future of a country built on balance, cooperation, and shared identity. If Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Quebec ever break away, the ripple effects won't stop at the border, they'll reshape everything from your grocery bill to your passport. So, what do you think? Would Canada survive a provincial breakup, or would the whole system collapse under the weight? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to stay informed as this story unfolds and more like it hit the headlines, subscribe and turn on notifications. We've got more on the way, and Canada's future is a story worth following. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next